In the coming weeks, I will show you how to set up a Drupal 8 website and introduce you to the various components of Drupal 8. In this tutorial, we'll start with setting up your Drupal 8 website, including the installation of the database and walking through the installation profiles. Let's begin. So Drupal is a content management system that is known around the world. It has many uses for a lot of government entities as well as universities in the United States. In particular, one of the most popular, well-known Drupal websites is the White House website, which is whitehouse.gov. Many universities use it for their particular university-based websites or even organizational-based websites. So I'm going to show you how to do the installation using an Ubuntu server. This particular setup has the LAMP setup, which is Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. And so I have already downloaded the code from the Drupal.org website. So you go to Drupal.org and then /download, and it will allow you to either download Drupal in the zip file or download Drupal as a tarball. So I have chosen the tarball option for my particular setup. And so in my directory, I have the Drupal tar, and I have untarred to this directory here, which is Drupal 8 tutorial. So now I will go back to my browser and I will pull up the Drupal 8 tutorial window, website. And so as you see, this tutorial will be for Drupal version 8.6.7. Earlier versions may have a similar setup, later versions may have a similar setup, but this particular setup is specifically designed for this version. So the first thing you're asked is to choose a language. Obviously I speak English, so I'm going to save and continue. If you need additional languages, Drupal has a language pack that is available on their website for that purpose. The next step will be to choose an installation profile. The default installation profile is the standard. With the standard installation profile, you have a number of modules that are already turned on that you just have to configure to however you want them to look. If you want to use the minimal installation profile, which basically will install just the core component or the system module of Drupal, user module, and the node type or node module, and after that everything else is open to your customization. And then there's this demo installation profile, which allows you to have a pre-designed site already set up. You know, it's just more of just to see how they'll allow you to do or experience Drupal without actually doing too much. Everything out of the box will already work. So for the sake of this tutorial, we're going to use standard. However, if you want to do more advanced items, you will do the minimal installation. But since we're doing the standard installation, these same steps that we're doing as part of this process will also need to be done as part of the minimal installation. So next we'll do save and continue. All right, next it will verify the requirements. So these are the requirements that you need to have in place. You need to have a web server. So as I mentioned earlier, we are using Apache on Ubuntu. You need to have PHP. I'm using version 7.2 that is installed to Ubuntu. PHP extensions. There are various extensions that are required. If you don't have these, it will tell you which ones that it will be looking for, and you'll need to install those. The installation of those PHP extensions will not be covered in this tutorial series. Caching for PHP is enabled. Memory limit is set at 128, which is more than sufficient. I think Drupal previously has a memory limit of 64 megs, if I'm not mistaken. The file system needs to be writable, and the reason that this is the case is because Drupal will write temporary files like CSS and JavaScript files to the file system, and instead of generating them every time a request comes in, it just sends that from the file system instead of generating those. And then you also need database support, which is enabled. I do have MySQL. And then the Unicode library is also here. So all of these check out to be okay. The one error that it does mention is that the settings file does not exist. And so Drupal requires the settings file to be created. In some installations, depending on how the permissions you have set up, Drupal will actually be able to create this file on its own. However, in my particular installation, it is not able to do so. So what we have to do as per the instructions here is to copy the default settings.php file to settings.php. And more information about this is in the install.txt file that comes as part of the Drupal installation. So I'm going to switch to my terminal window and going to go into my Drupal folder and going to go in sites default. And in here, you'll see the default settings file. And so just going to copy this. And so to confirm, I now have a default settings file and a settings file. And then what you'll also want to do is check the permissions for this particular folder, the site's default folder, because in some scenarios, the web server will not have access to write to the settings PHP file. And so the error message that you will get will look to be the same as this one here. However, the actual error will not be the settings file, but instead it will be that the parent folder is not writable. So it'll complain about that instead. So now that we have a settings.php file, we'll go to the bottom of the page and click try again. And so we've passed the verification of requirements page because now we're at the set database page. So the next step is to enter in the credentials to access the database. And so what I'm actually going to do is go and log in. So my database is on this same server as the web server. If your database is on a different server, you'll need to do the same thing, but on that particular server. So I'm going to log in and I have root access to this particular database. However, your installation may not have that, but essentially these same steps will need to be performed. So I'm going to turn off the auto commit so that when I run these commands, they don't automatically execute immediately. And then the next thing I'm going to do is to create the database. And so I'm going to name this D8 tutorial for Drupal 8. And I'm going to also create a new user. So we're going to do, well, I'll do this one command at a time. So that command is in. Now I'm going to create a user. We're also going to call that user D8 tutorial for simplicity's sake. And my host name is localhost, so I will enter that as well. And then I'm also going to enter in a password. I don't have a particular password that I normally use, so I'm just going to enter in something here. Obviously, I would recommend that you use something more secure than numbers in reverse numerical order. And so that has executed successfully. And then I'm also going to grant privileges. On that particular database. So D8 tutorial .star, and then to the user ID, which is D8 tutorial at localhost. And I forgot the keyword of all privileges. And so that command has completed successfully. And then to confirm everything is done, I'm going to commit. And so going back to the web page, so my username is D8 tutorial. Database name, username are both the same. And then the password is what we typed in the prompt. And now the host name, if your host is on a different server, you'll need to enter that server name here as well as the port number. And so I'm going to enter in a table prefix. And so what this will do, it will rename every table that is created in Drupal with this prefix before that table name. Now, the reason that this is useful is because if you have multiple Drupal installations that are sharing the same database, you can identify which installation is using what set of tables based upon this particular prefix. And then this also could be applied if you have one database, but you have multiple applications, not specifically Drupal, but just any other applications. This will help prevent those type of collisions. So then you'll do save and continue. And it will check to see if these credentials are correct. And if it is, then it will continue to the next step, which is to install Drupal. And so now it is installing all of the modules that are defined in the standard installation. The minimal installation only has, I believe, 10 modules. So the minimal installation will obviously complete faster than the standard installation will, since there is less stuff to install. All right, now that the installation has completed, there is one final step, which is to set up the configuration and the root user or the maintenance account as is defined here. So if you see this message here at the top about the settings PHP file, what you'll need to do is to change the permissions on this particular file. So go back to your command window. And as you see, the settings PHP file has full read-write permissions for owner, group, and public. You actually need to change this. So I'm going to change this with chmod 555 settings.php. And then to confirm, I'm just going to list the permissions again. And as you see, each of the levels only has read access. And this will make this message go away once that has been defined. The next thing is you'll need to set up the information for the Drupal site. So I'm going to enter in a name, and this may be too long. So, and then you also give it a site email address. Now this is the email address that emails will come from. So like it mentions here, site registration, password resets, or any other notifications that need to be sent out will come from this particular address. So make sure ideally this address should have the name of your website as the domain name in it, so that when these emails are sent out, they will not be flagged as spam. However, since this is a local installation for demonstration purposes, I'm just using localhost.com for this example. Next, we'll set up the site maintenance account. Now, this will be the equivalent for a root user or administrative user in Linux or Windows, respectively. So this particular user will have full access to the entire site. So you want to make sure that this particular account is not used only unless it specifically needs to be. I would recommend creating an additional administrator account that is not the root account, so that permissions and so forth cannot be just freely changed in case your site gets hacked. So I'm going to name this one with my respective username and a password. And then it will use the default email address. However, you can change this and it won't change the email address up here at the top. And then I am in the United States, and I'm also in the Chicago time zone, which is the central time zone in the United States. And so I'll leave that set as is. And then the last two checkboxes here are for the website to check for update notifications. And if you uncheck this one, it actually will disable the other one. But this one will actually send you an email notification if there's a update available to be installed on your Drupal site. I would recommend turning this on in your development environment, and if possible, leave your development environment running and that way you get your notifications from your development environment. However, some people do have this option enabled in their production environment since their development environments are not always running. I will be turning this off for this particular series because this is a development environment that does not have access to be able to send emails to this address. So instead of getting those errors in my logs, I will just turn this off. And then last but not least, click Save and Continue. And it will take this form information, create the root user for your Drupal site, as well as enter this into your site information. And so you see here, the site title has now been defined here, and I'm also logged in up here as Almost ENGR with the account of Almost ENGR. And then also you see this message here. I do have something that changes the permissions on here, so that's why this message is still appearing. However, if you did change the settings.php file to read-only access, this message will not show. And then you also see that Drupal installation has been completed, and this is what the final setup will look like as the default modules are already configured. If you have any questions about the setup or you have any issues that you've encountered in your particular setup, please drop a comment in the comment section below. If this tutorial has been giving you inspiration or has helped you in any shape, form, or fashion, please give it a thumbs up. If you would like to be notified when future videos are released as part of this series, please be sure to subscribe and to click the bell.